And the Mongol invasion is historical landmark, or some, I would say, libertarian-oriented Russian writers and historians, they call it the curse. The curse, this memory trauma. Okay. Unlike present-day Russian nationalists, who just the opposite. They embrace the Mongols. Okay. They cherish them, especially these days when anti-Western, anti-American sentiments are on the rise in Russia. Okay. So the legacy of Mongols now is increasingly incorporated in the present-day Russian ideology of Eurasianism. Okay. Those of you who might read about present-day Russia, remember there is a vague ideology that is shaped by the present Russian regime, and the name of this ideology is Eurasianism. It's an attempt to show that Russia shouldn't side with Europe, although it had some roots in Europe. It's a more Asian-oriented. So we should be proud of our Asian legacy. We should embrace it. So that is why not so much talk about destructive consequences of the Mongol invasion. Not so much talk about the destructive consequences of the Mongol invasion in the present-day Russia. But it was not the case in the 19th century, especially when Russia was undergoing a profound westernization. Okay. Some Russian historians, especially, I repeat, of this classical liberal leanings, they emphasized how destructive it was. So it kind of threw away Russia, destroyed the connections of Russia with Europe. Okay. And many, by the way, for some classical liberals in Russia, the Mongol invasion became a good excuse. So they said that Russian economic underdevelopment, so-called economic backwardness, should be traced to the Mongol invasion. And they did have a point, because the Mongol invasion was extremely destructive. Okay? But as it always happens, people take advantage of some excuse and kind of amplify it, exaggerate, and that's the case. Okay?
But in one of the articles you gave us, right, he was basically saying that the topography, the geography of the steppe, the tundra, and the taiga says that that area is going to be, should be viewed as one area, Eurasia. But I think what he doesn't do is distinguish between the Turkic Mongol people and the Slavic people, of which the Russians are part of. And the Slavic people belong to the European side of where the Ural Mountains come down. Because he seems to be saying, because it's, you gotta look at the geography of this, that Russia is really, should be in charge of, control Siberia and all of the Asian part, and it's separate from Europe. But I think that distorts the geography completely.
Yeah, in geography and ethnicity, right?
Yes.
Although there was a lot of mixture, of course, but still there were constant wars between nomads and the Slavic people, so he kind of downplayed. Okay, you are talking about one of the articles that the Prince Trubetskoy, right?
Yeah.
Trubetskoy, something like this. I'm not good in spelling. Trubetskoy, in 1920s, as far as I remember, wrote this article about Genghis Khan legacy in Russia. Okay. Reason I gave you this article is to emphasize this ideological element in what people in modern times wrote about the old Russian history. Trubetskoy actually was this spearhead of this ideology which I just mentioned, of Eurasianism, okay, in 1920s, 1930s. a white immigrant, you know, after 1917, people who were against communism, they were called so-called whites. People who defended communism, they were reds. So the white immigrant said what the communists were doing essentially was good, and he embraced the reds. He said because they bring together Asian and European elements, and he even wrote this article on Genghis Khan where he blurred the difference between nomads and Slavic people, kind of downplayed these geographical differences and said, oh, we are the same, okay? And this viewpoint was forgotten in Soviet Russia, when Russia was under communism. But when communism fell apart in 1991, there was a large group of Russian intellectuals who embraced this viewpoint and elevated it and now amplified it and developed into this ideology of Eurasianism. So the Prince Trubetskoy was the spearhead of this ideology of Eurasianism. Okay. It's an attempt, ideological attempt to bring two parts of Russia together, because politically Russia, as you know, brings together Europe and Asia, at least Eastern Europe and Asia. So that's an attempt to kind of reach some kind of unity. Okay. But I gave you also another article to read. It was it is a scholarly article. Unlike this is an ideological article. Okay. But the second one by Ostrovsky is a scholarly article where he writes about more important elements. Okay. He actually shows how Mongols affected Russian history. Okay. What were the ways? So we will be talking about it. Okay. So Mongol invasion. If you took world history classes, you know that Mongols in 1200s, for environmental reasons, droughts in Mongolia, okay, the necessity to explore new pastures, they advanced to the south, advanced to the east. You probably know from introductory courses of world history that Mongols had conquered China. Okay, and for many years they controlled China. Okay, there was so-called Kublai Khan. You heard about Kublai Khan, one of the Mongol Khans. There's a movie, by the way, recently on Netflix called Marco Polo. Okay, it's about this Mongol prince who was in head of China. At the same time, Mongols, they moved to the east. In fact, the majority of them moved to the east because this plains, which could be found in southern Russia, in southern part of Siberia, were familiar to them. The climate was familiar. Okay, so the hordes of Mongols expanded there. They assimilated local people in the Volga River. Okay, and rolled on and on. Okay, Genghis Khan, everybody heard, right, about Genghis Khan. Founder of the Mongol Empire. In fact, Mongols were very few, but they were very skillful warriors because their life was warfare, nomads, horse riders, okay, and they were able to integrate people whom they conquered, and the local nomads in Eastern Europe were included into his army. Okay, and when the Mongols reached what we call Russia, they conquered and assimilated local nomads who had been fighting Russians earlier. Okay, so they assimilated mostly people who were known as Bulgars. Bulgars, maybe you heard about Bulgars. Bulgars. You know about country named Bulgaria, right? So present-day Bulgaria can be traced to Bulgars. What happened after the Mongol invasion in 1200s? Part of Bulgars escaped to the west, like Slavic people. Okay, Bulgars eventually assimilated with Slavic people. Okay, and today they speak a language which is very similar to Russian and Ukrainian. Okay, but the others who remained, they were conquered and assimilated by Mongols. Okay, they were nomads. And the invasion of Mongols were so swift, profound, and the Russian principalities lost their freedom so quickly that people in Western Europe, especially those who lived in Novgorod Republic, Eastern Europe, Novgorod Republic, Russian-Lithuanian state, Hungary, German principalities, they were petrified. Okay. At some point, Mongols, not Genghis Khan himself, but his successors, they went through Poland and reached Hungary. Some of the Mongol detachment, they reached Italy. Okay, your textbook doesn't mention it. They reached Italy. So the fear was so profound. Okay. Plus, on top of this, Mongol invasion, it was not only a military destruction, a subjugation of people. Here, principalities of Russia and Middle Eastern peoples, I forgot to mention that after they subdued the Russian principalities, they moved to the Middle East, Near East, or conquered these areas. Okay? So created this huge empire. But moving from Mongolia, they also carried gray rats with them. Gray rats did not exist before in Europe. Okay, Europe had so-called how they called them, black rats that lived in attics. Okay, they didn't carry plague, but these gray rats that were coming from Mongolia, they were carriers of bacteria, of plague. Okay, Mongols did have immunity for this disease, you know, although in ancient times, in 800, 900, some of them did die from plague, but eventually bouts of plague developed some immunity. Okay. In fact, the plague originated from China, from this area. Okay, the crowd areas, when people are crowded, that's the breeding grounds, you know, for diseases. If you want to find out why major epidemic diseases came from China, I want to repeat this. Read the book Jerry Diamond. It's a very popular book that tells you global history from a viewpoint, environmental viewpoint, ecological viewpoint, geographical viewpoint. So he has this geographical determinism. Which, of course, you might say one-dimensional, but as far as the ancient and medieval history is concerned, he is right, because in olden times, people had been affected by environment more than us. Of course, we're also affected by nature. We're still part of nature, no matter, sometimes we like to think about us, oh, we're masters of the universe. Okay. No. We're prisoners of nature. But still, the space of our freedom from nature, a little bit more than the space of freedom that ancient ones carved for themselves. The ancient ones depended more than us from nature. So in this case, Jerry Diamond is correct when he gives global history this environmental look. The title of the book, Guns, Steel, and Germs. Excellent book, you know. If you have a chance, just for fun, strongly recommend. So there is a chapter in this book. Even take this chapter, find some pirated copy, you know, PDF. Click title of this book PDF, and you will find it, you know, because it's pirated, posted everywhere, you know. Nobody buys it, everybody copies. So a very interesting book. Chapter 3 or 4, you will find it. He writes about the major epidemic diseases. And almost all of them originated from animal and human contacts in this area of China, okay, inland China. Almost all of them. Amazing. So no wonder that, by the way, the most recent disease, you know, also Right now, of course, we know that probably because of the negligence of this lab assistant, something happened in Chinese lab. But our original reaction, including myself, was that, oh, because virus originated from this traditional interaction of humans and animals. Okay? And everybody believed in this because the major diseases, epidemics, of course, corona is not epidemic, it's a virus, but we're talking about bacteriological bacteria, this more serious disease like plague, measles, or smallpox. Okay, a lot of them originate from this context, humans and animals, and spread. So bubonic plague, Mongols brought bubonic plague, and it was a real killer, real killer. The situation in many respects reminded what we have here after Europeans invaded or discovered the New World. Okay, you know that Native Americans. Okay, go ahead. You kind of
Yeah.
wanted to
I
make
was
a
going to
comment.
raise my hand, but you're telling me what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Okay. The same thing. Yeah. I'm glad that we are on the same plane. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So remember, Kenny, you probably read, or some of you, how many Native Americans died, right?
90%.
90%. 90%. Exactly right. Exactly right. But in Europe, in Eastern and Western Europe, up to 60% of people died. It's a huge amount, but still, of course, less than Native Americans. Why? Because Native Americans, unlike Europeans, were completely sealed off the old world. Here, at least we have the Silk Road. There were some kind of occasional interactions, okay? Of course, people were generally isolated, but still, we have contacts. But despite this context, 60% in towns of Europeans died, in the countryside, up to 50% died, especially in Western Europe. In fact, in Eastern Europe, less people died compared to Western Europe. Why? Because Western Europeans had no immunity for this disease. You know? At least in Eastern Europe, they had some interactions through nomads with China, okay, indirect contacts. So you see, it's interesting to trace how bacteria were spreading around. But still, it was the great killer. The point I tried to make, this long detour I made, it's just to emphasize that Mongol invasion was not simply an invasion, but the invasion that was accompanied by this horrible epidemic disease, which Europeans were not familiar with. Okay, it became known as Black Plague because when you got sick, your face and body was covered with this grayish black ulcers. Okay, it's a horrible appearance. So people were petrified. Okay, entire social life was disrupted in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So that is why in human memory, Mongol invasion was associated with something horrible, something outrageously destructive because of this disease. Epidemic disease added to this general fear.
It also doesn't know, but like, I can't remember the exact name of the city, but apparently like the Mongols have been like sieging it for years, and like the city had been holding because like while they were laid off because of the Mongols, they had complete access to the Mediterranean, and of course like this was, I think this was like around when the Mongols had just like this was like right before they got immune to the plague. So like apparently like they called for backups from Mongolia, and like when they came, like those people actually brought the plague. And so like when the Mongols just decided to finally give up on the siege, like as like a middle finger to those in the city, they basically committed the first act of biochemical warfare, and they launched their plague-ridden corpses into the city, and that's theorized to be like one of the major starts for the spread all over Europe.
Yeah. What you mentioned, it's a famous legend. Although some historians say it's a true story, there's a debate. Okay, it happened in Crimea when Mongols invaded, went through Russia to Crimea, and they besieged the local town Kaffa. Kaffa, by the way, was the major slave trading place, because the major slave trade in the old world was in the Black Sea area, okay? In Middle Ages, up to 2 million slaves were shipped through Crimean Peninsula. People seized from these areas, southern Russia, they were sold to the Middle East, okay? And the local tribes controlled this, local Muslim tribes, okay? But what you made reference to is the Mongols besieged this area, and the legend said they were throwing corpses. They were throwing corpses, right, of people across the wall, infecting people in this particular area. Is that correct, Ed?
Yeah, and then the merchants were basically freaking out, so
Yeah.
they would end up selling off to other cities while taking the plague with them.
Yeah. See, but it's a legend. It's a legend. What the last part is correct about merchants taking the disease to Europe. Okay. About throwing corpses, I think it's imagination, because I think the infection happened naturally because of rats that came here and because huge crowds of people interacted. The siege continued for many months. Okay. And it wasn't total lack of interaction. There were some interactions, so Mongols invaded the city, entered the city, then escaped back, then some of the residents of the city Kaf also attacked Mongols, so there was interaction. But merchants in the city of Kaffa, they got sick, got this virus, and 1347, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the date, you check the date, okay. 1342 or 47, I think, 47. Correct this, if I'm wrong, okay. See, the plague already came here before, but in earnest it hit year 1340s, 1350s, because these merchants escaped from Mongols to Italy, Florence, Genoa, and that's how they brought plague to Europe. And from Italy it spread to Germany, France, and England, and the people died by thousands. Okay? In fact, the entire population of Europe was so decimated that feudalism, you know, feudalism was gone. What does it mean, feudalism? Feudal lords, yeah, can you?
Yeah, just feudal lords giving like land to their like friends and benefactors that
Uh-huh.
creates like a social structure of
Uh-huh.
royalty, like lords, and then like peasants and people who can't like
Uh-huh.
fight for themselves or work or like.
Good, good. But what was the status of peasants? One more time. We mentioned it, I think, sometime before. What was the status of peasants under feudalism? So were they free people or
No.
not? Uh-huh.
They're basically just like indentured servants on like lands of the feudal lords. Like they
Mhm.
work the lands that the lords own.
Yeah, yeah. The only correction, they were not, they were like indentured servants, but I would say they were more like lifelong indentured servants. Because indentured servant is a very person who is enslaved for 10 years, 7 years, but after this he or she could go free. But in this case, they were bound to land, right? Mhm.
Yeah, my impression of that was basically they were looked at as part of the land.
Part
So
of that,
if
yeah.
the land changed hands,
Yeah.
so did the peasants that were working it. So they weren't any different from the dirt.
Yeah, good point. I welcome you to embrace this explanation, because I frequently, especially in introductory classes, I have to explain what's the difference between a slave and a servant. There is hardly any difference, but the major difference is here, because slaves could be sold without the land as personalities, as human individuals. Peasants could not be sold as individuals. They always were sold or removed or shifted with land, okay? Because they were bound to land, they were treated as dirt, as part of the dirt. It's a very good metaphor. Yeah, I will be using your metaphor. Yeah, because it's the best way to explain. Thank you. So anyway, the effect of the disease was so deep and profound that this type of society was destroyed. Why? Because a lot of peasants died. Some lords died. Many lords died. So peasants escaped from the villages, so they started to move around, especially in Western Europe. So lords could not force them. They couldn't bind them to land. So ironically, the disease liberated the peasants. Remember this? I always emphasize this in my introductory classes. Since you mentioned it, so I'm going to emphasize this again, because people forget about this. That's the irony of our ecological disasters or wars, you know. Sometimes wars, seemingly destructive wars, produce quote-unquote progressive effect. Second World War was horrible. Millions of people died, but as a result of this war, there were so many inventions introduced in our life, from radar, penicillin, you know, and a bunch of inventions that improved our life. Those who remained alive, you know, our ancestors who remained alive. Same with peasants in Europe who became free people, because lords had to pay them money to. They tried to kiss their butt, so to speak. Come to us, work, you know, and the peasants could play lords against each other. The labor was so costly in Europe, okay? And by the way, one of the reasons why Europeans came up with all these texts, okay, like why they used the gunpowder, cannons, why they used windmills on a grain scale, because there was no manpower. So they had to use the nobles, okay, unlike some Russians or other people, Indians, you know, who didn't need, or Chinese were like plus minus 2 million people, no big deal. They could do, you know, like Great Wall of China, 2 million people were killed, you know, cemented into the wall, you know, no big deal. So there was such abundant human resource, you know, but in Europe there was no such resource. You know? So, again, a huge detour from our conversation about Russia, but I never miss a chance to put Russia in the context of the world history. Okay, so the Mongols invasion was treated as a disaster because it was accompanied not only by mass destructions but also by this horrible plague that especially hit 100 years later after Mongol invasion. So remember, Mongols invaded Russia, Middle East, Eastern Europe by 3 waves. There were 3 waves. If you read the book carefully, you will see. So this huge empire was created, okay, as a result of this invasion. The first major defeat and subjugation of Russia started in 1223, where combined forces of some nomads, local nomads who lived close to Russian borders, got together with Russians and tried to resist the Mongol invasion, but they were defeated, and that was the beginning of the end of Russian principalities. Okay. So that's the beginning of so-called Mongol domination.
I've been told that the English word slave comes from the word Slav.
Yeah, it's one of the theories. Yeah, yes, because it's that's what I made reference to. It's because this area was the major source of slaves.
Yeah, that's what triggered my thought.
But when Genghis died, his empire fell apart, was divided among his successors, and the area that dominated Russia and continued to invade became known as the Golden Horde, And the capital was here, in the Volga area, called Sarai. Sarai, by the way, later one of the words incorporated by Russians. If you read this article by Ostrovsky, you will find out, that Russians historically borrowed many words from the Mongol language, especially to label different things in financial system, different terminology for postal system, military terminology came from Mongols. Okay, some residential expressions, terms came from Mongols. So Sarai, the name of the Mongol capital in modern Russian language, means a barn. A barn. Just a barn, a shack, okay? That's what it means. Okay, the invasion continued in 1230s, but in 1240s, all Russian principalities were conquered, and the Russian principalities were not directly dominated by Mongols. So please make a note of this. Russian princes were ruled indirectly. So Mongols exercised an indirect rule. So the best way to describe the status of Russia was a tributary state. Okay. As I said last time, Novgorod was the only one that hadn't been conquered because Novgorod volunteered, yeah. Remember I mentioned the Prince Alexander Nevsky, who volunteered to pay tribute to save his republic from destruction. So each Russian principality had to pay a tribute, annual tribute that was delivered originally by each prince who went to Sarai, the capital of Mongols, and delivered this tribute in person. And the amount of tribute never was fixed. It was always shifting. So Mongols each year, they set a different amount of tribute. So there was no fixed system. I want to emphasize this again for us to remember something which this communist historian Karl Wittfogel called Oriental despotism. Remember this politically incorrect term. Like, for example, in Western Europe, when even peasant serfs, when they had to pay something to their lords, or vassals, lords who depended on other lords, they had to perform some duties. Everything was fixed in contracts. Okay, contracts were signed, and the people knew what to expect. Here, nobody knew what to expect because there were no written contracts. Everything was done verbally. Okay, and that's it. So Mongols were societal war. So that is why they were not interested in production, let me put it this way. They were warriors, that's how they viewed themselves. The tribute collected from Russian principalities or from these Arabic areas in the Middle East they conquered, China, was used to nourish the Mongol army and the elite. Okay, that's how it was used. At the same time, there was, we have to describe exactly what was going on. Okay, Mongols were very tolerant in terms of religion. We have to emphasize this. They were pagans themselves. They were shamanists, so they believed in spirits. Later, many of them embraced Islam. Not all of them. Those Mongols who remained in Mongolia, they continued to be pagans. Okay. But those who came to populate Golden Horde or Middle Eastern country created by Mongols, they embraced Islam. But they didn't impose Islam. Strange, eh? Unlike Arabs who had set on jihad after Muhammad died and carried jihad to Egypt, Northern Africa, okay, conquered all these areas. Mongols were not anal about religion. They didn't care. I think it originated from their pagan mindset. They incorporated Islam and other bits and pieces of other religions. Buddhism was also incorporated. Okay. In fact, Mongols who lived in China, they incorporated bits and pieces of Buddhism, Islam, mixed it together. Okay. It's a typical behavior of pagans when they try to shop around, as Native Americans would have said, shopping around for powerful medicine. Okay, that's what Mongols did. They were shopping around for powerful spiritual power. Okay, and they believed that if they incorporated as many gods as possible, it could be good. Okay. To make a long story short, they didn't impose Islam or any other religion on Russian principalities, and the Russians had the free reign to worship and disseminate Orthodox Church everywhere. In fact, missionary activities increased in Russia, despite this conquest by the Mongols. I will tell you more. Mongols never taxed the Russian Orthodox Church. They excluded it. So Russian Orthodox Church was allowed not to pay any taxes. Okay, of course, Russian Orthodox Church loved Mongol Khans, so that's how we have this interesting symbiosis of Christians and Muslims / pagans, who kissed each other, metaphorically speaking, and loved each other. Kiev finally was gone, as just remark on the margins. Remember, I started telling you that the role of Kiev was on decline by the 1200s because of nomadic invasions. Local nomads constantly harassed Kievans. So, but Mongols kind of leveled the final blow, destroyed completely. 1240. And the Russian memory, all Russians familiar with this expression, Mongol yoke. It's like a Mongol domination, a Mongol supremacy, Mongol oppression, so different ways to translate, which lasted for 300 years. And of course, as I said, a lot of Russians explain certain drawbacks of their own system, economic system, political system. Everything is ascribed to Mongols. Mongols were bad, they gave us the bad tradition, they injected us with this Oriental despotism. So we are innocent. We were good, we had been good originally, but we were spoiled by Mongols, okay? You can hear it even from Russian intellectuals, okay? It's a widespread practice, In fact, I will tell you more, like if you go to the third world countries right now, like Tanzania, Uganda, so Burma, everything is explained by colonialism, the legacy of colonialism, British imperialism, French imperialism. Whatever bad happens in these countries, it's because the Western countries are so screwed us up, And it goes on and on and on and on, The same thing with Russians, okay? So it's so easy to find the scapegoat. All right, so I mentioned Alexander already, so we're not going to. A few words about Golden Horde. What was this state? Golden Horde was a nomadic state, even though they had a capital. But this capital had few permanent houses. Mostly Mongols lived in so-called yurts. You heard about yurts. It's you can Google it. Those of you who don't know, it's a felt. It's a felt. I should have included the picture. Okay. It's a frame like an Indian teepee. Only teepee is like a triangle. Here, like semicircle. A frame that is covered by felt. It's pretty warm. You can even easily can survive winter, and a fire inside. A hole on the top. Inside they dried all their whatever meat, whatever they hunted. And they constantly would change their residence, moving around.
Is this called a yurt?
Yurt. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I guess I mispronounced it.
Yeah.
In fact, among some American bohemians, people who are with money, who are spoiled, don't know what to do. It's a fashion right now to live in a yurt. People who kind of don't know how to burn their money. So Google it, you will see. Of course, Russian princes competed with each other or to receive sympathy of Mongols. Okay? And the Mongols enjoyed it. They used these tactics, divide and rule. It worked well, okay? Because as I told you last time, Russia did not exist as the United States. Last time it existed under Vladimir, and then it fell apart. So many Russian princes trying to push each other, trying to prove that they're the best servants of Mongols. So subservient. Everybody, each prince trying to be subservient to the Mongol Khan. Okay. At first, as I said, each prince delivered separately their tribute to the Mongols. Eventually, the competition became so severe that Mongols started to appoint one of these princes to collect all tribute and bring it to the Mongols, okay? And the competition increased. It even increased. Competition increased dramatically. Why? Because Mongols started to single out this one prince who was the most honorable, the most trusted, and they gave him so-called Yarlik. Yarlik, it's like a seal on a chain. He put it on himself, a chart of authority. So a person who was the major Russian prince, because Mongols gave him the right to collect tribute. Okay, so that was the big deal. Okay. I mentioned about psychological effect of conquest. You know about this. I said disease plus destruction. Mongols hated sieges. I forgot to tell it because it's an empty word, which 3 times I repeated. Oh, Mongol invasion was a very destructive, very destructive, very destructive. So what does it mean? You may ask me. Mongols, like many nomads, they hated cities, they hated towns. So they literally razed many Russian towns, destroyed them, burned them. In Middle East, in fact, they burned Baghdad, completely destroyed Baghdad, erased. Okay. Because it contradicted their lifestyle. Of course, eventually Russians rebuilt some of their towns, and I guess Mongols realized it's better to, you shouldn't kill the cow that brings brings milk, right? So and eventually they turned Russia into a tributary state. Okay. Stopped harassing them, but originally the destruction was profound because a lot of cities were literally erased from the face of the earth. See, it's right here. I like this map because some maps, they color Russian principalities in the same color, yellow color, golden cord. It's not exactly correct because Russia, although she had been conquered, but it was not ruled directly. Okay, so that is why this map is more correct, because Russian principalities are colored in a different color here. So it visually gives us the idea. So it was an indirect rule. And here you can see the other Russian states. See? 1, 2, 3. Okay, we talked about it last time. Church was left alone. Okay, we know this. Now, those of you who read this article by Ostrovsky, what did you learn from this article? I know you said it's an academic article. It's a hard read, you know. I understand. It's a bunch of endnotes, and it's not fun. Maybe for scientists, it's not. You are the scientist, you are the scholar. You can digest.
I'm having severe eye problems.
Yeah, I know.
I haven't been able to read.
So who read? You read? Who else? Anybody? You read? Could you tell us what did you get from this article?
Well, it seemed like the Russians were they were kind of accepting of the Mongol integration, because they didn't have their own, or they weren't centralized in a way that the Golden Horde had that offered. I didn't really think it at the time.
Okay, but basically we are learning from this article about the effects of Mongols on the Russian political system, right? So basically what I need from you, some kind of good examples that might stick in our minds And we say, hey, that might be one of the major ways how Mongols had influenced Russian political tradition.
So the thing that struck me was like, you know, during the days of the Kievan Russia, like, you know, it was very autocratic. Like, if you were above someone, you had absolute power over the people below you, and that was normally used to its fullest extent, in part because you needed to survive. And what the Mongols introduced was almost the idea of local sovereignty, in the sense of like, you know, yeah, technically, you know, Alexander Nevsky answered to the Mongols, but that mostly just meant that once a year he gave them money to leave them alone. And beyond that, you know, he was still a Russian prince, able to do his own thing. As long as, you know, as long as the folks upstairs approved, but, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Good point. So on the one hand, Russia did carve Russian principalities, plural, always we are using plural, not singular. They carved for themselves some kind of autonomy, right? They were able. That's good. You did notice this. But on the other hand, there were some Mongol patterns that...
One of the lines that I think struck me was that they copied the Grand Prince owned all the property that he controlled, as did the Khan.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very important. So remember, in Western Central Europe, the princely domain and the state domain, they were separate. Okay. Even Louis the 14th, the absolutist monarch, I'm jumping ahead, he wasn't able to freely kind of tap into the state treasury, so he needed an approval. But here we have the tradition when the Khan, Mongol Khan, believed that everything belongs to him, and all these people are servants, his servants. The service to the Khan was copied, imitated, emulated by Russian princes, and that's how Mongol tradition was integrated in the Russian tradition, where later Russian princes were expected to serve the Tsar. They couldn't just stay in their principalities. Okay, they had no concept of private property, which was weak anyway in Russia. We found out, but Mongol tradition kind of completely squashed this idea of private property and amplified the significance of autocrat, the significance of Khan autocratic power. Okay? And the later Tsars started to imitate the behavior of Mongol Khans. Okay? They're very good. So this centralization. On the one hand, we have this local autonomy, yes, in local life, but on the other hand, heavily centralized power where Khan could arbitrarily dispose the lives and properties of his subjects. Okay, good. But what was the way this Mongol tradition was transmitted into Russian culture? It's very interesting. That's one of the reasons I gave you this article to read, because it describes, since some of you historians, it's interesting to trace historically how this Mongol tradition, autocratic tradition, Khanate tradition was sinking into Russian political tradition.
I want to say it was marriage, but I don't remember.
I remember talking about like the princes would like stay in the capital of Mongolia.
Very close, very close. Go, yeah.
They kind of worked firsthand. I know that you married some of the ones later.
Marriage, yes, but not the major. It was not the major transmitter. You said princes stayed at the Mongol court. Yes, they did. But it's not the complete answer. So let's move in this direction. So did you find out something which could be more effective? Did you notice something? You're on the right track, basically. So who was staying mostly at the court of Mongol Khans? If I'm Alexander Nevsky, I come, I kind of kneel down, kiss the boot of a Khan. I might stay there 1 month, 2 months, but eventually I go home, right? But who stayed for 2, 3 years, sometimes for 5 years?
Go ahead.
They were hostages.
Yes.
They were hostages.
Exactly, hostages. There was a special word. It's a typical Mongol way of doing things, of making treaties, because nothing was written down. Mongols exchanged with conquered, not correct. They demanded from conquered people so-called amanat. Amanat. I have this word somewhere in my PowerPoints, but okay, I'm not going to. Amanat means hostages. Okay, they demanded sons, mostly sons and daughters, occasionally, to move with the Mongol Khan and be raised, educated at the court of the Mongol Khan, for them to be raised in the Mongol spirit. Okay, so that's how many sons of Russian princes were left behind at the Mongol court, and later when they came back, they brought the Mongol tradition, because young minds, young kids absorbed this nomadic tradition.
But the Romans did the same thing.
Yes. Yes.
See, I mean, that was the Gallic tribes.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
they had to provide hostages too. Same
thing. Yeah, the same thing. It's a good correction. It's good. From what I said, you might think, oh, it was a unique way of Mongols. No, it was not unique. Many other civilizations practice the same thing. Nothing unusual about this. So basically, through children, this tradition was sinking into the Russian political culture. So that's why it became so powerful. Because adults, still, if I'm an adult, I'm placed in a certain environment, I might live a double life, who cares? I might despise this tradition. But kids observe this tradition. These councils, town councils, of course, were on decline because of the powerful Mongol tradition. But on the other hand, as a consequence of the Mongol invasion, we have the rise of the third center of the Russian civilization. It's a rise of Moscow. Or Moscow was the name at that time. Now we say Moscow, same thing. In fact, on many maps, they wrote this Moscow, Russian-Lithuanian state, Novgorod, and Moscow. That was the expressions they used on the maps. Or occasionally I noticed in 1500s, 1600s, especially in 1600s, along with Muscovy, they wrote Tartar or Tartars. Let me jump ahead. Okay. It's not here because it's in my new PowerPoint presentation, which somehow doesn't show up here. Anyway. I wanted to show you a map where two words together, Muscovy, Moscow, and Tartary. Why Tartary? Because of this mass destructions produced by Mongols, plus disease. In the eyes of Europeans, whatever was going on in the East became like hell. Tartar, what Latin name for hell. That is why on old maps, you see this word, Tartar. Tartar. Ural Mountain, Siberia, part of Russia is labeled by this word, Tartar. And that's how the modern word Tartars originated. Tartars. Tatars, it's a Muslim minority that lives in central Russia, who descendants of Mongols. Okay. In fact, in 18th, 19th century, Mongols who invaded Russia, Eastern Europe, created golden horde. They were called Mongol Tatars. And it goes back to Tartars, so people from hell. Okay, see, that's just imagination of Europeans ascribed to these people certain characteristics. Anyway, going back to Moscow, the rise of Moscow. Indirect result of Mongol invasion was the rise of the northeastern central Russian civilization, the third center of the Russian civilization, Moscow. What happened? The Moscow prince, tiny town, was here. Moscow was a tiny town of 1,000-2,000 people. Was built, what, the year? So these are the years where Moscow was on the rise, okay? But the first year, recorded year when the Moscow settlement was set up was 1147. Again, it's from my memory. 1100s. And it was at first insignificant, but later, with Mongol invasion, it increased in its importance. Why? Because it was located in the forest area. Second, it was at the crossroad of trade routes. Third, Moscow princes positioned themselves as people who could provide services, safe space, or safe haven. So if you don't want to be harassed by nomads, if you don't want to be harassed by Mongols, come to us. Why should people come to us? Because Moscow princes, I'm making the long story short, were able to secure Yadlik, the certificate of this right to collect tribute on behalf of the other Russian princes. So they became the major representatives of all other Russian princes, princesses, principalities. They had to fight for this right. They declared wars on other Russian principalities in order to squash independence of local princes and to show off to Mongols that we are the ones. So that is why in the eyes of peasants, Moscow princes became like a shield who could protect them, who could provide them security. So that is why Moscow power from the beginning was a very autocratic. Not only because Moscow princes imitated behavior of the Mongol Khans, but because they invited peasants. Okay? And the peasants like begging, coming, begging, save us, please help us. Okay? So from the very beginning, serfdom was a very powerful here. Well, I was right. So sometimes I remember the dates. I'm not good in dates. 1147, a small town, started as a small town, but later increased in its significance, political, geographical, economic. So safe haven. So that's the best way to remember the role played by Moscow. So license from Mongols to gather tribute on behalf of the other Russian principalities. The most prominent prince, Muscovite prince, who was able to build this power was Ivan Kalita. Kalita means an open door, okay, in literal translation. I'm surprised why in textbooks they do not always translate it, because his nickname, it's a nickname, Kalita, shows that he opened the door. Come to me, guys, girls, I will protect you. All right. So here's something which you mentioned, I mentioned, it's similar. Now I'm going to give you a few summaries of what we already discussed. Regular pilgrimages of Russian princes to Golden Horde, okay? Especially this, what we just emphasized. Don't forget about this. The effect of keeping hostages at the Mongol court, young Russian aristocrats. And simultaneously, we have diminishing Byzantine power. Remember, Byzantine tradition was legal tradition, bureaucratic tradition, based on formal laws. Now, the formal laws were evaporating. They were being replaced by informal laws. Okay? All right, so we're coming to the end, so I'm kind of finalizing. At the end, let me pinpoint a few cultural borrowings by Russians from Mongols, okay? Sometimes early historians were surprised why Russian czars embraced a lot of Mongol institutions after Russia eventually liberated herself 14 ages from Mongol domination. Okay, Mongols eventually, like Russians had done before, they split into numerous principalities, and that's what Moscow took advantage of. So servants became masters in 14 ages. Okay, later. It happened later. When Golden Horde became weak. Okay. And Russia was able to centralize herself. And of course, I repeat, servants became masters. But these servants totally embraced the Mongol tradition. And early historians were surprised why Russians did this. Okay. And the explanation is simple, because it was ingrained in the Russian political culture. Okay. They inherited it. When they started to use it, Russian czars used the Mongol tradition to dominate people whom they conquered. Okay. Especially, let me draw attention to the last bullet point. The tradition of yasak, tribute. Remember, I told you that Russia was a tributary state. Moscow collected tribute on behalf of the Russian principalities. A Mongol name for this tribute was yasak. Okay. And what Russians did after Golden Horde was gone, 1480s, 1500s, 1600s, they spread around this tradition of tribute. They started to impose tribute on conquered people in Siberia, in Asia, in the same way. Okay? And in fact, they didn't destroy local institutions. They used the local institutions, indigenous institutions, simply forcing them to pay tribute, like in Siberia. I will tell you more, a peculiar example. The tradition of tribute collection survived until 1917. I'm sorry, can you imagine? 1917. Until 1917. So let me put it down somewhere. Yasak tradition. Until 1917, until the Communist Revolution. Siberian natives had to deliver to the Russian Tsar tribute in pelts. In kind, pelts, nuts, meat, bringing this tribute each year to collection points. See how archaic it was. Amazing. A Russian administrative system copied many Mongol elements. District system was copied from Mongols. A lot of words were introduced from Mongol, like paper, pencil. For some reason, it came from Mongols. Simply because paper, pencils, they were used in late Golden Horde, when the elite started to use Chinese paper to write letters. Not the formal agreements, don't get me wrong, but letters, pledge of allegiance, exchange of letters between Mongol Khans and Russian princes. And I guess that's the reason why Russians started using these Mongol words for paper and pencils. came from China, by the way. Money, the Russian word money came from Mongols, dingi. It's a Mongol name. D-E-N-G-I, dingi, money, comes from Mongol. Hostages, traditional hostages. For example, if you read about the history of Alaska or Siberia, you will find out that Russian explorers routinely took hostages from Native Americans, sons and daughters, to guarantee their loyalty. It comes from the Mongol tradition. Even used the same word, amanat. It was the Mongol word used to label these hostages they took from, let's say, from Tlingit Indians to Sitka area, Alaska, to guarantee their loyalty. That's how durable the Mongol tradition was.